Warning for young people, the staggering number of hospitalizations for age groups that were believed to be at lower risk.
It feels as if I smoked like a pack of cigarettes in a blizzard. It's like the air feels thin and it just feels very heavy on my chest.
Officials pleading with young people observe social distancing guidelines as U.S. cases soar to nearly 13,000. Also, new hope for treating the coronavirus. President Trump announcing the FDA is fast-tracking 2 potential treatments. The battle ramping up, construction underway on an emergency hospital on a soccer field. On the front lines, critical shortages. The CDC telling doctors and nurses to use scarves and bandanas for masks as a last resort. The new travel warning, Americans now being told to avoid going anywhere internationally. In Italy, a grim milestone, the most deaths now anywhere in the world. A military procession carrying dozens of coffins. But China, for the first time, reporting no new cases. Should the extreme measures in China be used here in the U.S.? The alarm being sounded tonight on scammers taking advantage of the pandemic. What you need to know to protect yourself, and our experts answering key questions. The precautions you should take when food and supplies are delivered to your home.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
All right, good evening. We have known all along this was going to get worse, especially as more people are tested, and it certainly has. In some states and cities, the running tally of people infected by coronavirus has doubled, over 3,600 here in New York City alone. And as each day passes, some of the things we thought we knew about this virus have changed, like the risk to younger patients. A lot of what we're going to tell you tonight may feel overwhelming, but there is progress on some fronts, including the search for treatments. Our team is ready to go with the latest. We start with Miguel Almaguer.
Tonight inside intensive care units across the country, the CDC says nearly half of all coronavirus patients fighting for their lives are younger than 65. While often deadly for the elderly, the virus is now taking more lives of those who are not senior citizens. The young not only catching the illness at higher and higher rates, but also spreading it. Tonight, LA County ordering residents to stay at home. Matt Schulte has had the virus for over a week.
It feels like my lungs are half fluid in them. The air feels thin and it just feels very heavy on my chest.
As officials in Washington state scramble to build a 200-bed hospital on a soccer field, the number of coronavirus cases nationwide is hitting yet another milestone, climbing to over 13,000. More than half the cases in the country come from just 10 counties across 3 states, New York, Washington, and California.
The number of test positives is increasing.
Today at the White House, a call for social media influencers to warn the young about the virus. The governor of Maryland with a more pointed message amid spring break scenes like these.
If you are engaged in this type of activity, you are in violation of state law and you are endangering the lives of your fellow Marylanders.
With the State Department making an unprecedented move, telling Americans not to travel abroad, Carnival Cruise Lines is offering their ships to serve as floating hospitals to relieve stress on a burdened onshore medical system. Now, the first 2 members of Congress, Mario Diaz-Balart and Ben McAdams, have tested positive, while in New Jersey, so have 7 members of the Fusco family. 73-year-old Grace died just hours after her son and 5 days after her daughter. Cases in neighboring New York are skyrocketing.
Nobody can tell you when this is going to end. Nobody can say 2 months, 4 months, 9 months. Nobody.
Amid ghostly scenes like this around Boston, as Americans heed warnings to stay away from others, the U.S. Census is suspending field operations, while the CDC suggested live streaming funerals to avoid crowds. The National Guard now deployed to over half the country.
With COVID-19, it's like we have 54 separate hurricanes in every state, territory, and the District of Columbia.
Tonight, our nation fighting the virus and fear as both spread across the country.
In a letter to the president, the governor of California now says over the next 8 weeks, he expects more than half of California will become infected with the coronavirus. That's more than 25.5 million people, a staggering number. And Lester, many are worried, could other states have similar projections?
All right, Miguel, thank you. Let's turn to the front lines of the pandemic and the people we're going to lean on through this crisis. The hospitals, the medical staff, they're running short on supplies. While a vaccine may be more than a year away, the president says he's trying to fast-track 2 potential treatments. Here's Tom Costello.
On hospital campuses across the country, triage tents now help manage the crush of people fearing they've got COVID-19. Any needing hospitalization are isolated. Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston has set aside an entire COVID wing. Doctors and nurses in full protective gear.
We're spending up to 2 hours at a time in these rooms with all of the equipment on, which is very difficult. You can't really breathe that well, and it's very hot, so you get very exhausted wearing it.
Tonight, the American Hospital Association says it needs $100 billion immediately to deal with the emergency, as med centers nationwide tell staff to conserve masks.
In some cases where it's as safe as possible to do so, actually reusing those. And then for other things like respirator hoods and goggles, we are being told to save those so that they can be cleaned and reused later.
The government promises more are coming as the CDC recommends making masks out of scarves and bandanas. Also today, the president said 2 drugs already approved for other purposes are under review for COVID-19 patients. Chloroquine, a malaria drug, and remdesivir.
It's going to be very exciting. I think it could be the game changer.
But the drugs are not yet approved for COVID-19 and may not work. Remdesivir, originally designed for Ebola, may work better on coronavirus. Chris Kane was put on the experimental drug in a Washington state ER and says he saw fast results.
Within 48 hours, I was feeling a lot better. But I mean, I got a 5-day dose of it. And then I got home from the hospital over the weekend, so.
The good news, most people who contract the virus will have mild to moderate symptoms and can treat themselves at home.
It's not much more than getting rest, staying hydrated. If you have a fever, maybe taking, medication for the fever like acetaminophen. But the most important thing is really to practice social distancing.
Meanwhile, with young people ignoring pleas to stay inside, the resident physicians at Abbott Northwestern Hospital in Minneapolis have their own message.
We stay at work.
For you. You stay at home for us.
Tonight, the Massachusetts Medical Society says the situation there is dire. Not enough protective equipment for doctors, nurses, and technicians on the front lines of the pandemic. Lester?
All right, Tom, and thanks for that reality check. A lot of people do get through this. Also breaking tonight, the State Department warning Americans not to travel overseas, and stranded Americans want to come home. Here's Andrea Mitchell.
Countries close their borders. Travelers, including thousands of Americans, are stranded, struggling to find a way back to the U.S. The State Department tonight raising its global travel advisory to its highest level, telling Americans who live in the U.S. not to travel abroad, and U.S. citizens living overseas to stay put. Among those trying to get home, hundreds of Americans in Peru, which closed its borders Monday. Commercial flights are not an option. 19-year-old Aiden Earhart and her friends are at a hotel outside of Lima.
It could be a lot worse, and I think like our whole group attitude is that we're very thankful for the resources we do have.
Aiden's father, a Boston doctor.
We'd love to have them all back with us and safely sound back here in the U.S.
President Trump saying the military is working to bring them home.
We have a group of young people in Peru, and we're working on taking care of that with the military.
But embassies and consulates are working with skeletal staffs. In Morocco, all the U.S. ambassador could do was post a video today.
We are exploring all options.
Small comfort for travelers.
It's scary for Americans because we don't know where we're going. We don't know if we're getting home.
Tonight, the U.S. Embassy in Peru sent messages for people to sign up for commercial flights, but no sign yet that the border is reopening. Lester?
Andrea Mitchell tonight, thank you. And tonight, lawmakers are hashing out that massive economic aid package that could top $1 trillion and offering some new details about those checks that would go to Americans. Here's Peter Alexander with that.
$150,000.
President Trump tonight at FEMA.
Feel free to call me, the vice president, anybody at the table.
Pressed by governors on teleconference for help, including for devastated industries in their states, like in Nevada.
Unfortunately, had to shut down the Strip in Las Vegas, and tens of thousands of hospitality workers have been displaced.
The president earlier responding to bipartisan critics demanding to know why he has not used the Defense Production Act a day after invoking the law. that would compel private companies to manufacture life-saving supplies like ventilators.
The governors are supposed to be doing a lot of this work. Federal government's not supposed to be out there buying vast amounts of items and then shipping. You know, we're not a shipping clerk.
The White House highlighting one of the ways it stepped up, waiving liability so U.S. manufacturers can now send millions of new industrial masks meant for construction sites to be used in hospitals. President Trump overnight signing a relief package that provides paid sick leave and unemployment benefits to those affected by the pandemic, as well as free testing. And tonight, the president saying he's open to barring companies that receive federal aid from using it for executive bonuses or to buy back their own stock.
Well, we don't want that. It's very hard to tell them not to, but I would tell them not to.
And tonight, the Senate is unveiling its proposal for those checks to Americans. As an example, anyone making $75,000 or less would get $1,200, and qualifying families would get $500 per child. Lester?
A lot of folks could really use that. All right, Peter, thank you. The impact on this pandemic on American business is growing more devastating. Unemployment claims, not surprisingly, are up, and now a new warning that a third of restaurant jobs could be lost in all this. Gabe Gutierrez has more.
Tonight, Uber driver Yasser Hussein is looking for work. He says business is down 90%.
It's scary because you don't know what you're going to do in the next days.
Across the country, workers in limbo are sounding the alarm.
We're asking you, please don't forget about us. We need your support.
The National Restaurant Association is predicting a loss of $225 billion over the next 3 months if the crisis continues, meaning 5 to 7 million jobs could be slashed. That's a third of the total restaurant jobs in the U.S. In Austin, Texas, already reeling from the cancellation of the massive South by Southwest festival, audio engineer Richard Bonoy is stunned.
It's very uncomfortable. It's a little depressing.
The Labor Department says last week it had 281,000 claims for unemployment insurance, a 1/3 increase from the week before. Carrie Rydell opened her cafe in Kentucky just 10 months ago. Now she's drastically cut hours for some of her employees.
We had people coming in to use our Wi-Fi to file unemployment here in a cafe, and so holding on to my employees and for them to see that, it's very alarming.
Some places are hiring. This supply warehouse for the grocery store chain ShopRite is bustling.
The biggest event that we had prior to this was Sandy.
But the empty streets are already taking their toll.
How long do you plan to stay open?
As long as possible.
In Brooklyn, New York, this barbershop is fighting to stay alive in the age of social distancing. This business has been in Ralph Rubinoff's family for 40 years.
It's very difficult to see some of the employees have families and they're suffering because there's no work.
The Small Business Administration is now offering emergency loans, and lawmakers are considering expanding that program. But some entrepreneurs say they might run out of money first. Lester.
Gabe Gutierrez tonight in New York. Thank you. We'll be right back in 60 seconds with a new warning about scammers. Yes, scammers